on a board meeting.
Oh, now we're unmuted. Now we should be the speaker.
And they were all looking at me and I said, should I turn off my
I don't know what to tell you.
note so you aren't
So you're not
distracted?
Yeah. Well, there's gotta be some good segue of Musar and
Oh, there is.
pride and not pride. and, yeah,
Exactly.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And so when Rabbi Block was asking me at first I said, oh, and then he said, well, the question is, do you have
You
energy?
need to mute her.
And I didn't realize how my energy would be depleted by an accident.
Oh,
to be
Yeah, you
honest
hope
with
so.
So go, you need to mute this, Christine.
Yeah.
So I've had to
There you go. Oh, nope. Oh,
just.
yeah. Oh, that's us?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Otherwise,
Makes sense.
I'm not.
Yeah.
I'm not
Your
doing
psyche's
myself.
shaken.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. That's the reason for my limited involvement in the Sunday groups.
Mm.
You have one more person to let in.
Hide all from
Zoom.
the camera.
Understood. Yeah, when the hell?
Friday,
Oh.
Friday, week ago,
Uh-huh.
yeah, this, last week.
Mm.
And, but no, because Henry took me to the, no concussion and stuff, that's good. No broken bones,
Also good
good.
talking or thinking.
Yeah, I can,
This is
but, it's just amazing. Of course, I experienced
Oh,
grief,
yeah, got it.
And you have one person to let in.
saps.
There you go.
Sure.
You're trying to
Yeah.
heal and all the energy is going to that, and I didn't know.
All right.
All right, I think we're ready.
Yeah.
Now good? Hey, everybody. The University of Arkansas at Little Rock wants to thank you all for being here today, especially our panelists and our moderator, for this very important conversation. My name is Christine Jones. I'm the past chair of the Racial Barriers Committee on the University of Arkansas at Little Rock campus. Today, along with our co-sponsors, the UA Little Rock Student Government Association and UA Little Rock Downtown, the Racial Barriers Committee presents this panel on anti-Semitism and how to combat it in the state of Arkansas. The Racial Barriers Committee advocates for racial equity and works to eliminate discrimination and stereotypes for all students across the UA Little Rock system. We are focused on removing all racial barriers, injustices, segregation, or disparities on campus. We serve as a safe space for students to share and/or address any grievances and help to create a safe environment without discrimination, harassment, or any other physical or emotional harm. Our goal is to identify concerns and experiences that inhibit learning and social experiences for students in the college community and to create change to minimize future concerns. As such, we brought the National Day of Racial Healing events to the university campus for the first time last year, and we're very excited to bring them back to the campus for a second year in 2023. This year, we chose to focus on all forms of discrimination against minorities of all colors, races, and religions. The Jewish population in Arkansas accounts for approximately 2,500 citizens, just 0.1% of the overall population of the state. As a minority in our state, the Racial Barriers Committee and the Student Government Association felt our Jewish community needed a public stage to discuss the issue of rising anti-Semitism in the United States and how we can attempt to eliminate anti-Semitic incidents in Arkansas. Our panel moderator today is Dr. Rebecca A. Glazier. She's a political science professor in the School of Public Affairs at the University of Arkansas at Little Rock, as well as the director of the Little Rock Congregation Study, a longitudinal community-based research project on religion and community engagement. Without further ado, I present to you Dr. Rebecca Glazier to begin our discussion and introduce our panelists.
Thank you so much. It is such an honor to moderate this panel today, and especially to begin by introducing our honored panelists. I'll start with Rabbi Block, who I consider a dear friend. He has been the rabbi of Congregation of B'nai Israel since 2013. He was ordained in 1991 at Hebrew Union College and Jewish Institute of Religion, and he received an honorary doctorate there in 2016. And he really has served Reform Judaism nationally and regionally, including as editor of important commentary published by Reform Judaism, where several of his writings have appeared there, and he blogs for them. And I personally have been particularly impressed with his interfaith and social justice work. In 2012, the Human Rights Campaign bestowed its Equality Award upon Rabbi Block at its annual gala in San Antonio. So he really has such a distinguished record and is such a valued member of our community here. And we're just honored to have Rabbi Block joining us on this panel. We also have Justice Annabelle Imber joining our panel, which is really a great honor. In 1997, Justice Tuck became the first woman elected to the Supreme Court in Arkansas. She's very active in the community and has served on several legal committees and boards. In 1998, she was recognized by Arkansas Business Magazine as one of the top 100 women in Arkansas. She retired from the Supreme Court in 2009, but she continues to be incredibly active and influential in our community, including serving as officer on boards of Congregation B'nai Israel, the Interfaith Center, the Musar Institute, and others. So really, we're just honored to have her here. She was inducted into the Arkansas Women's Hall of Fame in August of 2018. And we're very grateful for her insights and participation here on this panel. I'm also grateful to welcome Rabbi Biller, who really has a talent in making difficult Jewish topics relatable and understandable. And he just about a year ago joined Congregation Agudath Achim here in Little Rock as their rabbi. He's a graduate of the University of Toronto and has studied Jerusalem at Jerusalem Torah College and received his rabbinic ordination and honorary doctorate of divinity degree at the Jewish Theological Seminary of America. And he has held pulpits in a variety of places, including in Canada, Alabama, New York, and New Jersey. And we are just really excited to welcome him here to Little Rock and also to this panel here today. So thank you very much to all of our panelists for taking the time to join us. And I'm grateful for the opportunity to moderate this discussion. And to get us started, I just want to emphasize the importance of what we're talking about today. So the Anti-Defamation League, which tracks anti-Semitic behavior nationwide, has found 2,717 incidents in 2021. So just this past year, that they had full data for. And what's important about that number is that it represents a 34% increase from the previous year and is more than 7 anti-Semitic incidents every single day. So this is obviously a really disturbing trend. And my first question to our panelists is, why do you think we are seeing this increase in anti-Semitism? And Rabbi Block, if you would start, and then for each of the questions that proceed, we'll start with a different member of the panel.
Thank you. And anti-Semitism is known as the oldest hatred. So on the one hand, there's nothing new. On the other hand, I'm a 59-year-old American who was raised believing that anti-Semitism was more or less a thing of the past in the United States, that we might hear a stray comment here and there, but it was largely a thing of the past. And had you told me that I would feel that a panel like this was urgently necessary when I would be 59, I would have told you were out of your mind. That would never happen. And the trend that you described, you talked about 2021 numbers and how much they were up from 2020. That's been the case every year beginning in 2017. And I think it's important to answer your question honestly, whether people like the answer or not, that this is a trend, a grotesque trend that began with a huge exponential leap in 2017. And we have every reason to be concerned about anti-Semitism that comes from the extreme left and from the extreme right. They're equally terrible, they're equally problematic. And the huge jump that comes in 2017 is primarily about anti-Semitism from the extreme right and is attributable to the election of the former president. I don't mean necessarily to say it's attributable to the former president, or that it's attributable to most people who voted for him. However, we do know that the purveyors of hate in this country understood his election to be an endorsement of their worldview. They might have misunderstood his election to be that, but they understood it that way. And then when the Charlottesville riot happened, the then president gave those folks no reason to think that they were wrong. Remember, he said there were good people on both sides. So what's surprising about this, or shocking and disheartening, is the anti-Semitism that had to have lurked underneath the surface all those years, all those decades before 2017, when I thought this was a problem primarily of the past. And the unleashing of it into the public is extremely painful and dangerous, and will continue as long as large segments of the society will now understand that they're not alone, and believe that there is sanction from their leaders. Now, I should also say that I believe there are spikes in racist violence, in anti-LGBT violence, in all sorts of white supremacy. Anti-Semitism is its own phenomenon, and it is linked to white supremacy generally, all of which has spiked in recent years.
Thank you. Justice Tucker.
Yes, my perspective as a person born in Arkansas, where there was a Jewish population of about, well, it was in the teens, like 16,000, 17,000 Jews in Arkansas at the turn of the 20th century. And Jews settled Arkansas all through Arkansas in small towns. They came up, they immigrated through Galveston, they immigrated through St. Louis and Memphis. And it is interesting to me that we have lost many Jews. The small towns and the Jews that were in those small towns, their children have made a decision to move to other urban communities. And this means that the presence of Jews, as Dr. Glazier just as mentioned, we only have in the neighborhood of 2,000 to 2,500 Jews in Arkansas now. Well, what that means is when you don't know somebody, then you have a fear. You have the fear factor of them being different. Also, and I want to address the religion part of this. Rabbi Block has addressed the political part of it. In the South, basically, it is majority Christian and also majority what I'd call proselyting Christian, which means a position that does not allow for respect for other religions and honor of other religions, because there's only one way and the way is. And our young people, we know this from our religious school, our young people are experiencing this at a regular rate in their high schools, in their junior highs, and feeling unwelcome because, quote, they do not believe in Jesus. And a lot of this is misinformation, but what it basically boils down to is Jews are a community we are recognized as a community. In fact, when I converted to Judaism, I converted to the people of Judaism to identify as a Jew and not just to a religion. So this is slightly different than most religions. And what happens is when people are afraid, going back to the political side of it, we have gone through a terrible time of COVID. People have been affected economically. They have been affected by losing family members. It has been a trauma to our society as a whole. And with that trauma is fear. And what happens when people are afraid? They look for somebody to blame. And as Rabbi mentioned, we are the oldest group to blame. So I just want to raise a couple of things to say to our audience here, but online as well. As a general rule, there are statements out in the public that say all Jews are rich. I personally know that's untrue. Okay. All Jews control the media. Okay, that's a general trope that is out there. Jews control finance. And when those kinds of tropes get publicized, and this discussion that we're talking about is in the national, but also in the local media, where that allows people to say, aha, there's the group that's causing the trouble. Because if we're fearful, we're going to look for somebody to blame. That's a human condition, not a good one, but a human condition. And I will tell you, as a person who's been a public official, I have experienced some anti-Semitism, but I have really tried to focus on the fact that I believe in God with people. But I will tell you, my son has suffered from this because he does not feel welcome within social strata because he doesn't know where he fits. Do you understand what I say? He's been raised Jewish, he did a bar mitzvah, all of that. He believes in those principles. But then on the other hand, if he wants to have friends, he doesn't feel accepted as a Jew. That is my perspective. It's probably more of a personal perspective than a political perspective.
But a very valuable one. Thank you. Rabbi Bloor.
Yeah, hi, thanks. So my upbringing is a little different than you, Rabbi Block. I would say about half of my class in primary grades were children of Holocaust survivors. So I did not grow up thinking that anti-Semitism was gone. I grew up knowing it's there, seeing the trauma and the results of it, and assuming it's there. And as we've heard, it's been there historically. So when I think of history, Jews have always been whatever it is that people don't want. So if it's a socialist society, the Jews are the capitalists. If it's a capitalist society, the Jews are the socialists. If it's a wealthy society, the Jews are the people looking for welfare handouts. If it's a poor country, the Jews are controlling the money. We have become an easy way to say whatever it is. I mean, even when you hear that, it can't all be true. I mean, it's all not true. Yeah. So, I mean, we just become whatever stereotype is the thing that's not in fashion right now. Until the early 60s, even Israel was, this young upstart that was seen as, wow, this great young democracy, this place of resilience, and then that tide changed. And now it's the oppressor of, even though it's still the only democracy in the whole Middle East, et cetera. I mean, that's a whole other topic. But Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, who was the chief rabbi of the British Empire, said that the most insidious disease in the world is anti-Semitism because it takes whatever form will adapt to any change in society. And so we become the socialists, the capitalists, the needy, the too affluent, etc. I also think another expression that's been used is Jews are, because of those stereotypes, we're what's referred to as the canary in the coal mine. I mean, the real danger to any society is when you recognize that anti-Semitism is on the rise. It's a danger to Jews, but it's a danger to the society, because it's telling you that this is a society that's not respecting freedom, not respecting individuals, and it's the beginning of the downfall of that society, not simply a group becoming targeted. So, I mean, I could give all kinds of examples historically, but we are really the canary in the coal mine. You mentioned the political change in the last 5, 10, whatever number of years we look at. When hatreds rise, we're very often one of the first targets. But I think what I really want to say is the danger that is for everybody, because it just shows what's happening in the underbelly of society. I think the last thing I want to say is, there are laws against hatred because it's human to have them. And so I never pretend that anti-Semitism goes away. I think after World War II, it wasn't polite in society to be openly anti-Semitic as a response to the Holocaust, but that's faded. So it's not that it will ever go away, but we need to raise these ideas and make people aware of what's happening, what people are thinking, and how to break that down.
Thank you so much. I think that's really helpful for all of us to see this big picture of how we had this increase in anti-Semitism. And Justice Tuck, you helped us see a little bit about what's going on here in our own community. And Rabbi Biller, I know that you have been a rabbi in many different locations, and I wonder if you could offer us a comparative perspective. Here in Little Rock in Arkansas, do you see things as better or worse compared to other places where you have been when it comes to anti-Semitism here in our own community?
Yeah, it's a hard question. I've only been here a year, and I was a rabbi in Alabama. So, if there's any generalizations of more northern, more southern, and I don't even know if those are fair because I haven't been here that long. I think religion plays a more public role in the southern half of the states. So, we're leading into your comments. It's really a hard question to answer. I think anywhere that you have more varieties of people, you hopefully end up with more openness to the differences. And any society that's focusing on you must be this way makes it tougher. Yeah. So again, I'm not here long enough to know, but those are the things I think to watch for.
Yeah. Rabbi Block, did you have anything you want to add?
So thank God we haven't had any major anti-Semitic violent incident in Arkansas in recent memory. Doesn't mean that we won't. And doesn't mean that we don't need to. I suspect that most people who go to church don't realize that when people go to synagogue, the first person who greets them at the door, hopefully not the only person, but or at least one of the first people who greets them at the door is a uniformed officer. We have to have a security regime that our friends who go to church don't. I'm going to answer your question in two very distinct ways, and then I think it'll be important to hear Annabelle's perspective since she's the one who's from here. I would say that there is an enhanced extent to which members of the Jewish community of Arkansas feel not included in the wider society. And things are said by state leaders that are meant to include everyone in this, as if everybody was a Christian, everybody was a conservative Christian even, and just a sort of a general sense that that's who's here, and sometimes even exclusion, subtle or otherwise, the kind of proselytizing that Annabelle talked about that makes one feel that one doesn't belong, which isn't quite the same as anti-Semitism exactly. And I don't think it's even purposeful when one says that. sometimes we have things, there was an occasion, I think it was last year, if it wasn't the year before. There's a state representative from Western Arkansas whose name is Cindy Crawford. And she said that requiring, I don't remember whether it was vaccines or masks, but it was one of those, was like Dr. Mengele's experiments in the Holocaust, medical experiments in the Holocaust. And you know, that kind of a statement based on ignorance is really troubling. It's a form of Holocaust denial, of saying that what Dr. Mengele did in Auschwitz was no worse than a mask mandate. I will say that two members of our Jewish community, a father and son, Steve Ronell and David Ronell, who was in high school at the time, went to see Representative Crawford. And she was sticking with her guns until David, the teenager, took out photographs of Dr. Mengele's victims. And then she broke into tears and realized that she had made an error, though she did not publicly acknowledge it.
Wow.
And I think that's important because her statement that she'd made comparing mask mandates to the Holocaust to Dr. Mengele was public. So there's that issue of exclusion and ignorance. And then there's something else which most people most Jewish people are not troubled by. And that is philo-Semitism. And we have a fairly high degree of philo-Semitism in Arkansas among conservative Christians who view Judaism and Jews in a sort of an idyllic way that is not real life, and in some cases that's their basis for supporting Israel, a particular kind of support of Israel that is very anti-Islam and very anti-Muslim, that troubles me for those reasons. And I got to tell you that anytime somebody treats another group as fundamentally different, even when it's positive on the surface, it doesn't take much to turn a philo-Semite into an anti-Semite. And so that's a particular concern I have in Arkansas. That, by the way, the bad turn of that hasn't happened yet, but it's something I'm always watching.
Interesting.
Well, just to kind of wrap up this part, as you mentioned, we haven't had any recent anti-Semitic incidents, but there have been times when there's been what I call graffiti painted. In fact, I think that was done on at the temple one time.
Oh yeah, every Jewish institution in the world has it. We
has-
almost don't even think about it. And we
And
get out the power washers.
yes, but in terms of what I have tried to do, as you noticed in my biography, I'm on the board of the Interfaith Center. And my focus is to really make it one-on-one education about different religions, because the more you understand that we're all really reaching for the same, what I'm going to call feeling of meaning in the world, of feeling like we have a purpose in the world, but we just walk different paths. And every path, unfortunately, can be misinterpreted and misused by politics, misused by people who are power-driven. And so in Arkansas, because of the fact that we have a very small population, but I will tell you, our community, and this is not unusual in a Southern community, but not unusual in communities that have to watch over their shoulders. We stay quiet. we stay quiet. We don't want to be out front. And this was an interesting observation to me. I converted before I ran for public office the first time in 1988. I converted beforehand because I wanted to be straight with the public. And one of my fellow close friends, who's Jewish, came to me and said, do you really want to run? It was a concern about putting Judaism out in the public square. Now, my campaign did not really put Judaism out in the public square. I was born in Heber Springs, Arkansas, that was founded by a Jewish family. But I didn't, it was something where I said, why would I want to avoid this? Because I was coming at it from a perspective, candidly, where I had not experienced anti-Semitism. So I was not, quote, being careful to step back. We call it what? Shah still. And I'm just telling you, there's a lot of that in our Jewish community. And sometimes when I get out front on something, I have somebody call me and say, let's back up on that. And I said, no, not backing up. So it's a defensive mechanism. And I'm not critical of it. I'm just saying my perspective is that, I have to be who I am and be true to myself. And that, if that means, I eschewed opinions that were not well liked. School funding, and then the decision on declaring a criminal statute against sodomy unconstitutional. And we got the Supreme Court had a demonstration by the church from Kansas on this issue. So I can tell you, I have experienced those disagreements, but bottom line is, I really make sure that I am letting people know who I am, where I'm from, and that these different paths deserve respect. I need to respect the Christian path. I need to respect the Muslim path, the Buddhist path, the Baha'i path. How many religions are there? And not spend my time telling somebody, well, you're wrong.
Yeah.
That is where I'm coming from.
Yeah.
It's a very personal journey. So thank you.
No, thank you. I was wondering if you could help our audience here and on Zoom understand why it's important to address anti-Semitism, even if someone might say, that's just a little graffiti on the wall, that's no big deal, it happens all the time, or so there's stereotypes that people are perpetuating there, just brush that off. Why is it important to address that? Someone might say, it's not like Jewish people are getting beat up in the streets in Arkansas. Everything's fine. Like, this is no big deal. Just brush that stuff off. Why is it important to be addressing anti-Semitism at all of these levels?
May I start?
Please.
Okay. I wanted to share, and I'm going to share the information about how hate generally works. It starts with biased attitudes. Its foundation is biased attitudes, which is stereotyping, fear of differences, justifying biases by seeking out like-minded people, all of us talking to our own echo chamber, and to confirm our existing beliefs. Then on top of that, we get acts of bias. So non-inclusive language, microaggressions, belittling jokes. I know all about lawyer jokes, okay? But there are jokes about everybody. We know about the rabbi, the priest, and, you know,
And the lawyer.
and the lawyer. Cultural appropriation, you know, name calling, ridicule. And by the way, going back to 2017, it has become normal and standard to stereotype, to name call, to, I mean, every response to any criticism is calling the person a name. And that started at the very top. At least it made it public. Then you have systemic discrimination on top of that, which we know is present. We know it is in criminal, I can speak criminal justice disparities, inequitable school resource distribution. I can speak to that. Housing segregation. We know that from the red line here. In equitable employment opportunities, wage disparities, you get all that. And then you get the bias motivated violence. So all of this, I don't want to use the usual trope that's used to say, you know, that grass is an entry drug. But I want to tell you that, in fact, when biased attitudes become accepted, when acts of bias are no longer frowned upon, which we have already seen, when we have systemic discrimination, which we do, it's not just about Jews. I mean, it's all kinds of different groups. And then you get to the violence.
So it builds.
It builds. And at the top of that pyramid is genocide. And so what was said by Rabbi Biller is that our society is sick. And this is becoming normal operating procedure, whether it's anti-Semitism, you know, the canary in the coal mine, or whether it's anti-Arab, whether it's, I don't care who it is. That is becoming totally accepted and a norm. Every time somebody makes an argument, somebody else comes back and calls them a name. What kind of response to an argument is that? When I went to law school, that was not a response. So.
Rabbi
Yeah,
Biller, please.
a couple of stories, but
Yeah.
two little points.
Yeah.
Annabelle mentioned in her conversion, in rabbinic practice, part of somebody coming to convert to Judaism is to warn them that along with becoming Jewish comes what will happen to you as part of the Jewish people. So, you know, that don't be public, etc. You know, you're becoming part of a people who's been that target for so many centuries. And yes to your chart. You know, like the minute you accept those little steps, it just makes the next step easier. And then two stories. We had at a previous synagogue, we had a caretaker who was Black, who told me that when he was growing up, in his father's time, if his father were walking down the street and a white person was walking towards him, without anybody saying anything, the Black person would step into the gutter and then they walk on. So I remember what horrified me was, I mean, the act was horrible, but what horrified me more was that nobody acknowledged it. It was like, that's the norm. Like, it doesn't even merit acknowledging that someone just got off the street for somebody else. And that's those silent little, you know, the joke's okay, the stereotype's okay. Oh, it's okay, I didn't hit him, he just got off the sidewalk for me. I mean, that is, it's so horrifying, and all the underlying assumptions that it then allows. My other little story, we had a young man who made an anti-Semitic phone call to the synagogue over Christmas last year. And he called it about midnight, and horrible, you know, like, I mean, the worst of the world, aside from the swearing, but there was, you know, Hitler didn't finish the job, and there was a reference to gas chambers, and you all should belong there, et cetera, et cetera. We made a call to the police, as we're told to do, And they were able to track it from the caller ID, and they just called the cell, and the kid's father answered. And we were told that as a synagogue, we could lay charges. So our board met, and as a board, we came to a majority decision that to have this young kid have a criminal record wouldn't help him, wouldn't help us, wouldn't help anybody. Would just damage him further. So we decided to set up a couple of classes that we asked him to come to. We had his parents come to a few of them. It was by the third class, the kid he was pretty unresponsive young man, a lot of family issues, etc. But by the third class, he said to the small panel of us, he said, "I can't believe I did those hurtful things to people like you, like to just nice people." Like that to me, that was an amazing moment from a 14-year-old who hadn't thought twice about anything he said, and didn't even know. He didn't know that how wrong what he was doing. He had no idea of the triggers for us, and through the study, he found out some of that. But maybe that's a microcosm of what we're talking about. I mean, that young and the next class, he said to me, he talked about the things he hears in school, a lot of, these kinds. He submitted comments. He said, if I ever heard that again, I either would get myself out of the conversation or say something. Either of which was a big change from a kid who was part of that conversation. So just to reiterate, it's those little pieces, and in the precursor to World War II, first there were signs on Jewish stores, and then Jews had to give their radios in. Then they weren't allowed on the streetcars. Then you weren't allowed in the parks. Well, you could say that none of that's lethal. Okay, so you won't go in the park. But that says to other people, you're a different kind of human being. You can't be in my park. And then when you see those people sent away, well, they're not the kind we want here anyway. And it starts with the little pieces.
Yeah, thank you for sharing those stories. And I think that this is a good transition to trying to think about solutions, because I think that we're all feeling like this is a heavy problem, and we would love to hear your thoughts on what we can do as individuals and what we can do as a community to try to combat anti-Semitism, and what kinds of solutions we might be thinking of. Rabbi Block, do you want to get us started?
So thank you. So we have an effort that we've started at the temple, and it's including our entire Jewish community. It's chaired by Sue Weinstein, who's sitting right there, and Judge Audrey Evans. And it's called Kulanu. Kulanu is a Hebrew word that means all of us. And it's a joint project between the ADL and the Union for Reform Judaism and United Synagogue Conservative Judaism to combat anti-Semitism. And so they've given us, these are the experts really, and they've given us a number of mandates since we joined the partnership of what we're supposed to do. And one of the things we're preparing right now is a program within our Jewish community to enhance education about anti-Semitism within our Jewish community, so that we can correctly identify what is and what is not anti-Semitism. I don't think that we have a big problem with people calling something anti-Semitic that isn't. However, there was something public here in Arkansas in the last year involving the University of Arkansas at Little Rock that I think falls into that category, and that's harmful. But much more, there is the reticence to mention, to bring up anti-Semitism, and when really that is a problem, and often because people don't know what it is, including Jewish people, don't know to recognize what Annabelle describes as a base layer, as not just a harmless stereotype, but as real anti-Semitism, and as a danger for something greater. And then the next step is programming beyond the Jewish community. And so we're looking to hopefully a large interfaith event, maybe on a Sunday evening at a time when people from all different faiths and houses of worship can come together to learn. And I think we're going to also need to take the show on the road, as it were, because as my clergy partners have said to me, yes, we think we can get folks to come to something on a Sunday evening, but if you really want people, you come here on a Sunday morning. So, you know, I'll be doing, I think, some of that. I'm sure I won't be alone, that Rabbi Biller will be on that road as well. And Annabelle and others. And Silvana, who's on that committee, was here as well. And I should note that also the presence of the president of University of Arkansas Little Rock Faculty Senate, Joanne Matson, who's a member of our congregation. But the other really, really important piece of solution is solidarity. So one thing I suspect most people who aren't Jewish don't know, or would be surprised to learn, is that about a fourth, maybe it's a little more, of our religious school, those are young people in our congregation in Jewish studies in grades first through 10th, kindergarten through 10th. About a fourth of them are people of color. So the stereotype of the Jewish community as white is antiquated at best and false, really. And so when we talk about racial violence, racism, and its impact on our society, which is a much more obvious, clear problem in Arkansas, we have endeavored to be present as allies, not out front, because that's not our role, but as allies in the struggle against racism. The membership of Congregation B'nai Israel includes quite a number, and I'm sure it's true to Agudath Achim as well, but quite a number of LGBTQ folks. And we have an LGBTQ Chavurah. We've made no secret of it. This is something we are proud of, and we celebrate this diversity. And LGBTQ folks, and specifically, I think I need to name transgender folks, are under attack in Arkansas right now. And they are us. Even though I'm not transgender, they are part of our community, and they are part of we. And even if they weren't part of we, so even if, let's say, we were talking about Muslims, we don't have Muslim members of our congregation, and there was a problem with anti-Islam bias, we need to be there wherever there is, wherever white supremacy or group hatred is winning the day, or is carrying the day, or is having a significant impact, and standing up against it, known and present as the Jewish community present in that struggle.
Thank you.
I want to bring up not only the Kulanu, but has been mentioned earlier, David Ronell and his project with his father, Steve, to have a statute passed. And it was passed, as I recall.
Yeah, 2 years ago.
2 years ago, that requires education in public schools about the Holocaust. And this has to do with, once again, the whole issue of Holocaust denial. And so one of the things that I think is important is for us to push for the funding within the public schools for that education. Now,
So can I interrupt you just for 1 second? Because exactly on that point, as I was sitting down at the table and took out my phone to put it on vibrate, I had a text from Steve Ronell. There is a new piece of legislation to for this session to designate the last week of January. I think it's, you know, we have the Jewish calendar has its own Holocaust Memorial Day, and it's in the spring. So I never remember exactly what it is that's in late January that I think is an International Holocaust Remembrance Day. But in any event, so it's to coincide with that and the week before Black History Month. So, but for 1 week, not for a whole month, but for the last week in January, for that to be recognized in public schools as Holocaust Remembrance. So there is a new piece of legislation to support along those same lines. I know you didn't know about it because I've known about it at exactly 12 o'clock today.
Well, yeah, I try to stay up on these things. But
Busy on
but
panels.
I was gonna say, sometimes I'm doing something else. But I do want to say that it's important to understand that in funding public education, that this needs to be something where we push it at local school boards and push the education of educators. And of course, the teachers. There is a huge conference, and I'm trying to remember, in Northwest Arkansas
Yes.
on the Holocaust every year, where there is education of teachers. But I really think if we can make sure that this laws can be laws and nothing happens. We all know about that. So if this can be implemented and educating the next generation, then we might be able to cut into some of that stereotyping, because Holocaust education is a little broader than just Holocaust.
Yeah.
I mean, why did it happen? What were the dynamics? What was going on? I will tell you, as a Jew, in recent years, I've almost felt like, do we not learn anything from the past? I felt like we were walking through the late 1920s again, with anger, fear, violence, all of those things. And I was sitting here going, oh no. So I'm just sharing that additional point, and I'm so proud of David for pushing what he has done. I mean, he has experienced anti-Semitism.
Yeah.
He has shared those stories.
Thank you. And I think that Rabbi Block's earlier point about solidarity, that the advocacy for these things that you're talking about should come not just from Jewish people, but should come from everyone in our community.
Mhm.
Yeah. Rabbi Gola?
Yeah, just I want to add a layer of complexity to the solidarity piece. So 25% of the Hebrew school are people of color who are Jewish. So a layer that many non-Jews don't know. When I was growing up, I knew that I was not considered white. There were white people, there were black people, and then there were sort of Jews and Italians who were in their own category. Like we weren't, it would never occur to me that would be included by other people in that category of white. Just adds like another layer of the whole prejudice. And then the flip side, there are communities that kind of lump the Jewish community in with the white majority and therefore believe we've never experienced prejudice. Like, it's complex in both directions. So we just have to be aware of all the layers. Here's a little up bit of talk. Like you said, it's a heavy topic. So my experience here in Little Rock is that there is a lot of very uplifting activity that goes on. It is the Peace Camp, which is people of all religions and that means that parents are consciously choosing for their children to be in a mixed environment. They spend time at the church, at the mosque, at our synagogue. There's also a peace dinner, which takes place every year. People of all religions. The food's mostly vegetarian, so that Muslims and people that keep kosher and everybody can eat. But it was, I think they had about 150 people this year. And the friendships that happen, it's a very uplifting thing. And I think those are the core pieces. I get two more little stories.
Please.
Okay. Years ago, I was part of the Episcopalian Church has an education program that's a 4-year program for lay people. And a friend of mine who later became a minister invited me to attend one day to do a bit of teaching. And I ended up going every week, and oddly enough, became this Episcopalian training program, became kind of my spiritual home every Tuesday evening. It resulted in 5 years later, the minister and I led a trip to Israel made up of Jews and Christians who wanted to know each other and study together. And so in that trip, we would visit Christian holy sites and Jewish holy sites, and then at night meet and talk about what prejudices did we bump into? What did you not know? What did you know? And created a real community. And then we went to Rome and did the same thing in Rome. It was,
Oh, wow.
yeah, it was so, I mean, that to me is the epitome of, or the height of what we really want to do is people seeing each other as people, that we're all in different paths. And the more we realize that, the safer we all are. Oh, last story. There's a little town called Whitwell, I want to say Tennessee. A little town of about 2,000 people. No one had ever seen a Jew there. The teacher was teaching the Holocaust. And one of the students, there were 6 million Jews is the figure that's always given, among others who were killed in the concentration camps. One of the students said, "What's 6 million? I can't imagine that." And the class decided to gather 6 million paper clips to get an idea of the number. And in the Netherlands in particular, wearing a paper clip on your lapel was a symbol of resistance to the Nazis. And so they started this campaign to get 6 million paper clips. Children all over the world started to send paper clips in. And I've seen pictures of boxes coming from Japan, et cetera. And it became this whole living experiment to learn about the Holocaust. So here you have a town of 2,000 people, never seen a Jew. They become a worldwide center of Holocaust education. And here's the final, my personal piece. My father, God bless him, in his 80s, drove a very sophisticated, gentle guy, but he drove a Goldwing motorcycle and was part of a Jewish motorcycle group in Toronto. This group raised $60,000 to take to the school in Whitwell to fund more programs to teach about tolerance. So here's a picture. I mean, this is like a great picture for this topic. As the motorcycle group drove from Toronto down to Tennessee, more and more motorcyclists would gather. And so by the time they reached Whitwell, there were, I believe it was 200 Jewish men on motorcycles driving into this little town that had never had a Jew at all. They set the auditorium up. Down one side were pork and beans for everybody, and down the other side was kosher corned beef for the Jewish group coming in. And it hit the papers, and it just became an annual thing. And it's just, it's what's possible. So I'm going to leave us with that image.
Those are great stories. Thank you.
Thanks.
And I think the next question I'd like to ask is about kind of making these connections and learning about one another. I think that there are a lot of beautiful Jewish traditions that maybe well-intentioned people might know about, but might not really understand. I'm thinking of things like maybe lighting a menorah at Hanukkah or celebrating Seder with Passover. How can people understand these traditions better or try to engage with Judaism without appropriating? Does anyone, do you want to start us?
It's a big one for us. Yeah. So, I mean, it requires intentionality and respect. So, I want to start by saying that most people, which includes most Jews, misunderstand the relationship between Judaism and Christianity. There's this story out there that Judaism is a mother religion and Christianity is the daughter religion. And it's widely believed and it's usually invoked for good. So I don't mean to suggest that this is an anti-Semitic idea. It just happens to not be exactly accurate. And again, most Jews think this is the case. So what's actually more accurate is that Judaism and Christianity have common origins. That Judaism was developed by our ancient rabbis around the time who began their conversations before the second temple was destroyed, continued thereafter, and really established something that was quite different from the worship of the one God when the temple stood. And so if you think about it, I'm talking about a period that's more or less contemporary to the work of the church fathers. Okay, why do I say this in answer to your question? It's because many people imagine the Last Supper to have been a Seder. They often call it that. The Christian scripture does not call it that. The Christian scripture calls it a Passover dinner. Passover would have been observed, of course, in the time of Jesus. However, to call that a Seder is an anachronism. Seder was developed by the rabbis and is later. So what happens, Seder is the big thing that gets appropriated, is that Seders will, in some Christian churches, be put forward as this is what Jesus did, which is not accurate. Or worse, the symbols of Passover will get changed into Christian symbols, as if the matzah and the wine were the host of the Eucharist, for example, or the stripe. I mean, one of the things that's just kind of funny to me is that there's sort of stripes, if you will, on a standard piece of matzah. I mean, there's nothing in Jewish law that causes that. It just is the way that most of them are produced, and that those are have been compared to the stripes of Jesus, and or that the three matzahs in the matzah cover stand for the Trinity, and I mean, these kinds of things are clearly appropriation. And so to say that Jewish symbols are Christian symbols is false, and those who would say that it's fair because Christianity is rooted in Judaism, it's not true. They develop separately from. Now, of course, we have common scripture. We do have some common origins, but so I think first of all, I'm sitting by my phone waiting for the call from any Christian clergy person who wants to know how to do this respectfully. I mean, I'm happy to help anybody do it. I'm happy to go if I'm available to help them do it. But also, if individual Christians want to come to the temple, I'm sure it's true in Agudath as well, come to the temple for a regular weekly Shabbat service, for a Passover Seder, for something during Hanukkah. They're welcome, and anybody's welcome, and we're eager to show how we observe in our legitimate observance. I am well aware, and I really do appreciate that most Christian appropriation of Jewish celebrations and symbols is well intentioned, but you know what they say about the road to hell. And so I'm not saying that's hell, but it's not appropriate to appropriate, and we can all do better and treat each of our honor each other's traditions. So I mean, and to give some examples in reverse, I will say, you know, a lot of Jewish people have trouble wrapping their heads around the notion that Christianity is monotheistic, given the Trinity. And I say, look, we have to respect Christianity in the terms that it understands itself. And it is saying that those are three ways that in which the one God appears. That's not polytheism. And so, I mean, and I probably do a bad job of explaining the Trinity. We all probably do a bad job of explaining we don't believe in. But it's important for us to respect each other's traditions in every direction.
Yeah. And you do a lot of interfaith work, so you probably have some great experience in
And
this.
we have a sisterhood, myself, Susan Smith, who's Episcopalian, and then Sophia Said, who is Muslim. And what we do is we address certain topics like Jesus or this or that, and each of us speak from our religious tradition. And so we go around to any congregation of any faith. It's not just to Christian congregations. We go around and talk about these topics, the position of women, da, 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 da. And remember, it's not you got to understand, in Judaism, if there's the ability, there is always the ability to have a different point of view.
Right.
And so what I might share might not be the same thing another Jew might share. And so I make that clear that this is my perspective on these particular issues. But we do that also, and I'm sure you do it at Agudath Achim as well. We host confirmation classes from Christian churches. So they can come, they do a tour, they learn about things. And so they learn about Judaism when they're what, 13, 14?
Mhm.
And it really and they come to the temple, they stay for a service on Friday night. They come on a Friday and stay for the service. And so they really get a full picture. So but interfaith education is absolutely critical.
Mhm.
And it's not sexy. It's not, I mean, but I will.
I like
tell you-
it.
But I will tell you that our state newspaper has been wonderful in the religion section about explaining all of this interfaith work that's being done, whether it's Love Thy Neighbor. I mean, that is a congregation in itself that happens once a year. It's in September, and it started out as a commemoration of the 11th of September, but now it's become a celebration of song, prayer, wisdom. We always have a speaker. We have speakers from different religions. And I come away from that particular event feeling, we are together.
Yeah.
I mean, we have Hindu verses, we have Buddhist, we have Native American, come on, we'd love to have you as a part of it.
It's really beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah, something Annabelle just said reminded me, in terms of, from a Jewish perspective, not saying there's just one way to believe, that it starts from your earliest comment about the conversion.
Mhm.
The basis of Judaism isn't a series of beliefs. You can believe anything or nothing and still be Jewish. You know, I could be an atheist, I'm still Jewish in terms of the way Jewish people look at me. If I understand correctly, in the church, that's not the same. Like, you're a Christian based on your Christian beliefs. You stop believing, you stop being a Christian. So that's, I think, worth understanding. In terms of the appropriation, I was thinking this morning about Native American culture.
Okay.
And, you know, I may want, out of sensitivity, to know about their culture and learn as much as I can and teach others, but I wouldn't take on their culture as a way to show I love their culture. I mean, it's that fine line, you know, there's a disrespect
Right.
when they, well, I live in North America, that's now my culture. It isn't. I can know about it, and it's part of who we all are, but it isn't my culture. So I think that might be a key way to think about learning about a Seder, not appropriating a Seder, etc.
Yeah. Thank you. Well, I am just so impressed by our panelists. I could ask some questions and keep talking with them all day, but I want to also be respectful of the people who have come here today, and want to open it up for any questions from our audience. And then, of course, our sponsors have also catered us a lunch, and I'm sure all of you are like, when do we get that food over there? So I'll open it up to questions from our audience, and then we'll have some refreshments.
Do we have the possibility for people?
Yeah, and we have a great collection of people who are on Zoom as well. So I think we have the option, if you want to unmute yourself, you can ask a question that way, or you can also type something if you don't want to vocalize. You can also type something into the comment box, and you can ask questions that way to our panelists as well. Yes, please, Susan.
I have a question or a perspective on why, addressing your first question, why there's such a rise.
Yeah.
And rather than blaming any one political candidate or another, I think the whole reason that someone comes to power is because they are representing the feeling of the population. And so I think
rather than that person being the cause, I think they're a result.
Yeah.
I think that our current political situation, and I'm very non-political, but I think it's a symptom of this simmering, boiling up of people's frustrations otherwise. I think it's a symptom rather than a cause.
Yeah, thank you, Susan. And as a political scientist, I would also say that I think that those could be reciprocal as well. Those we can have, I think our panelists had said that there's things happening under the surface that can lead to particular people at many different levels coming to power and being elected. And then when those people then have a voice in the political system, they then give voice to more prejudiced opinions that then make those attitudes that are under the surface more acceptable. And so then more people say those things, and then more people come to power, and it leads to a cycle that can be positively reinforced, that leads to these numbers that we've seen statistically an increase year over year of anti-Semitic incidences around the country. So I don't think that those are mutually exclusive causes, but in fact, you can see a reciprocal relationship there. Yeah, that's a really excellent point to make. Thank you so much. Yes, please.
Related to that is that it's not a U.S.
Absolutely.
So the big upswing in anti-Semitism in the US started in 2017. We were watching what was happening in Europe in years before 2017. And so you're absolutely right. And maybe there are parallels. I don't know. I know about incidents that happen in Europe. I'm not expert to describe what the phenomena were that caused that, other than the backlash to immigration, which was part of what brought about the situation we had here starting in 2017. And by the way, you know, the Tree of Life murderer, his motivation was in part the advocacy, or actually kind of mainly what he wrote in his manifesto was the advocacy on behalf of immigrants by HIAS, a Jewish Immigration and Refugee Agency. And what HIAS says about refugees and immigration can not easily distinguished from what the Roman Catholic Church says about immigration and refugees. But he went to the synagogue. So, you know, I don't think it's a coincidence he went to the synagogue and not to a Roman Catholic Church, even though they say the same things that we do about immigration and refugees.
Yeah. Excellent point.
You know, if you look at world history, prejudice and persecution is more the norm than not the norm. And probably the last half of the 20th century was a bright light, you know, given the whole world. I mean, you know more than me on this, but just as generalities. And so it makes it particularly concerning sense negative, but we need to pay particular attention to the breakdown of that brighter time period, you know, to not have things revert to what basically humankind has lived more than not.
You know, when I talked about what my delusions as a young person.
Yeah.
So I was born in 1963, and one of the stories I was raised on was that when my father graduated from law school in 1961, he graduated from the University of Texas #1 in his class. And he did not get an offer from any major law firm in Houston or Dallas.
Mm.
And that had changed by 5 years later, dramatically, for Jews. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 had been adopted, and the way that many of us think of it is when those folks at the white shoe law firms, and I'm sure there were analogies in other professions and in other places, realized that somebody could want them to hire blacks, they hired Jews because that was easier, and less disruptive to their self-image or whatever. I mean, Jews in many ways were the first beneficiaries of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And so I was raised at a time when we really did think things were getting better and going to continue to get better. And I was raised in a very different place and milieu than Rabbi Biller was, that you know, yes, I knew Holocaust survivors, but it seemed to be ancient already.
And I was raised with the notion, sort of unspoken, but the notion was when you relax, that's the most dangerous time of all. And so don't ever relax.
And that's a lot of, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, when
You relax.
when you were raised in another place, that's.
Yeah, that's when,
And the other thing I want to ask is, you said something interesting when you said, well, we don't beat Jews here in Arkansas, so we don't beat them, right? Probably they left, probably they decided, probably they had problems.
Maybe they did at one time and then they left. Yeah.
It's not a beat, like beat, but probably they had problems and they leave the state.
Yeah.
And we have that.
Yeah.
We have-
Sure.
interesting.
Yeah. Well, I do want to say that I was posing a hypothetical that a person could say that, yeah, not necessarily me.
As you said, it's a combination between,
Yeah.
we don't need the Jews here, and with the Jews, we don't speak up,
Right.
probably in the
When
world
it
to
happens.
speak up.
Yeah.
So it's a good combination or a bad combination.
Yeah. It could be another one of those reciprocal relationships where there's a unfriendly environment. And so people might leave for a place where there's a larger community or it's a more diverse community where they feel more welcome.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, yes, yeah. Yes, please.
So what are your thoughts on banning critical race theory and how you think that would affect the Holocaust remembrance week that you guys are trying to get passed?
You know, in Poland, I think it was last year, they passed a law that you are not allowed to say out loud that Polish people had anything to do with Polish Jews who were sent to concentration camps, against the law. And how do to say, however you define race theory, to say you can't teach something a certain way because of what it looks like, I mean, you're just saying you can't teach what happened. I don't even know how to express how absurd it seems to me. I don't have the words. Yeah. Like it might, what's the thing? You can't teach it because white kids in school will feel bad. Hello. You know, I think, anyway, I have no other words.
Well, let's not forget, I just second everything Rabbi Biller said. And I just want to add to that let's not forget that in Texas, they adopted a law that you're not allowed to teach anything at school that might make somebody feel bad on the basis of their race or gender or religion or whatever. And that got interpreted by a school administrator in the Dallas area as meaning that you couldn't teach, that you had to offer alternative theories about the Holocaust or something, okay? And she was roundly criticized and as though she were some kind of a Holocaust denier or whatever. What was she? Either one of two things. A scared person who was trying to comply with an impossible and horrible law. Oh, by the way, she could have been both of these two things. And a person who was trying to point out the logical, absurd extension of the horrible law. So there will be people who say you can't teach the Holocaust appropriately. Now, by the way, that's not my main reason for opposing the restrictions on what teachers can teach. I among other things, I really don't know if a young person's going to be able to do well on the U.S. History AP exam, if if the US History AP teachers at Central and elsewhere are not able to teach what really has happened and continues to happen with race in America.
We do have a question from.
Oh, good.
From online. I'll read it out loud for you because it would be hard to.
Please.
For you guys to read.
Thank you.
Okay, so this is from Maurice Levin. As a Jewish faculty member teaching largely non-Jewish students, I often struggle with how open to be with my Jewishness in the classroom and what my responsibility is to combat anti-Semitism. I am an anthropologist, so my classes frequently deal with issues of racialized and gendered injustice. Here's the question. Do you think that in my position, I have a specific responsibility to address anti-Semitism in my teaching and or to discuss my own Jewish identity? If so, how do you think instructors like me should approach this?
Well, thanks for the question, Reese. The professor is a new faculty member this year at the University of Arkansas Little Rock and a new member of Congregation B'nai Israel as well. You know, I first want to say, I don't work at a university, so I'm not entirely sure how to answer all the aspects of your question. However, what I do hope is that wherever we are, we feel free to tell the people that we're with who we are. So that would be one part of my question, my answer. I also wonder, Reese, the extent to which your teaching about racialized and gendered justice and your interest in that field is inspired by being Jewish and by your experience as a Jew. And I tend to think that when we tell our stories, and to use that context to talk about how your personal background informs your interest in racialized and gendered justice, I think that would enhance what your interactions with your students. But that's coming from someone who is not in your business and doesn't pretend to know exactly. You know, it's easy for a rabbi to say because I'm always coming from a very clear perspective.
And they expect you to be Jewish.
Yes, they expect me to be Jewish.
I was thinking for us to answer that question, and it touches on that safety piece. You know, it's easy for me to say you should stand up and say what needs to be said. I'm not standing in a public room, and well, here I am kind of, but I'm not standing in a lecture hall where my paycheck depends on that university, et cetera. But that touches on like the very bottom line thing that do we have a society where it's safe to say who you are and what you think? You know, I'll tell you, I wasn't going to say this, but about an hour before I came here, I turned to my wife and I said, there were a couple of, do you think I can make comments such as, you know, and that had to do with church teachings and racial things and Middle Eastern politics. Like I was already thinking, what will be safe for me to say, you know, not knowing who would be here, what will be safe for me to say in this room? So it's part of the issue and it's endemic to the whole issue too. You know, you're the minority and you're saying what's not popularly heard or, you know, or what people don't want to hear. At the same time, maybe as a professor, you're talking about these issues, you can use Jewish examples as part of a series of other examples. That's, I think, would be my approach.
If I may veer off away from Professor Levin's question just a little bit, because there's one whole piece, huge piece of anti-Semitism in America that we really haven't discussed. And I alluded to it in my very, very first comment. But it also has to do particularly, not only, but particularly with university campuses. I have no reason to think University of Arkansas Little Rock. Here it goes. Criticizing any government is by definition legitimate. I do it all the time, whether it's the government of the United States or of Israel or Russia or the Ukraine or whatever it is, right? That I feel is worthy of criticism. And right now, the government of Israel is particularly worthy of criticism, if you ask me. But people who are critical of Israel's government and actions of the Israeli government, let me start off by saying, people who are critical of the Americans who are critical of the American government don't then go from there to hating and discriminating against all Americans. Okay? So what happens too often, particularly on university campuses, is that criticism of Israel's actions or government turns into anti-Semitism. And what do I mean? I mean, for example, a Jewish candidate for student government being declared ineligible or being booed down or voted down simply because they're Jewish, or and even
Or
they don't have
pro-state of
a
Israel. Or pro-state of Israel.
maybe, yes, but even maybe not. In other words, no matter what their position of on the look, I think I'm very pro-Israel. I don't favor the current government. So that's a nuance that not everybody wants to hear or well, is willing to open their minds to. And so there is an awful lot of anti-Semitism from the left that is supposedly related to Israel. But when you dig down a half a centimeter, what it really amounts to is the same kind of classical anti-Semitic tropes. The Jews are pulling the strings, the Jews have all the power in America, the dollars to Israel, blah, 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 blah. Representative Ilhan Omar tweeted once, it's all about the Benjamins, baby. In other words, it's about the money that the Jews give. So, and you know, my quote unquote liberal rabbinical organization made a statement very critical of Representative Omar when she did that. So we do have to be careful about anti-Semitism, whatever its source, and not to be so focused on the anti-Semitism from the right that we blind ourselves to the anti-Semitism from the left.
I'm glad you brought it up because it has been an unspoken in the room. Israel is the only country where when people oppose the views of a particular government, they then say, and therefore Israel has no right to exist. There's no other country in the UN where there's ever a vote about its right to exist. And there are many, we know there are many countries doing many horrible things right now. Israelis themselves have been called the most politically critical people on earth of their own government. But when that turns into, therefore you can't exist, it's just another form of anti-Semitism.
80,000 of them came out in the driving rain on Saturday night to protest against their government.
Right.
Well, thank you so much to our audience for coming and for your questions, and to our audience on Zoom as well. And especially, please join me in thanking our panelists who really offered such great insights today.
And to the best moderator ever. Thank you, Chris.
And Christine, do we have any instructions for our delicious lunch or?
Go for it.
All right, and please
Thank
enjoy
you.
some refreshments.
You're great.
Oh, you're so kind. Gosh, I appreciate all of your comments so much. Really, I learned